5 years ago today, he was locked up for 2 of his best friends. Now, the evidence against him is astonishing. But he's gonna get away with it. The police also know he's gonna get away with it, so they decided, why don't we just keep him for as long as we can? They even went as far as to track the fatal wounds, and they both came from the left side of the car. Remember, they said a drive-by happened from the right side. With all that being said, how could he possibly get away with this? All the evidence they found really points to Melly being guilty. People need to hear why, and they need to see the weapon. Those are like 2 bread and butter things for court. Technically, he's an innocent man that has been in jail for 6 years. That's what Melly's lawyers say.
They're trying to break him down and get a result that they cannot get in the courts.
YNW Melly's case is starting to feel like one of those Netflix crime documentaries where every twist leaves you questioning what's real and what's not. The buzz on the street is wild. People are speculating that Melly might actually walk free, dodging every single charge against him, including the shocking 2019 emails of his 2 best friends, YNW Sakchaser and YNW Juvy. And apparently the authorities are fully aware this might happen.
Also know he's gonna get away with it, so they decided, why don't we just keep him for as long as we can?
Crazy, right? For 5 long years, this case has been dragging through the courts. What kicked off as a minor drug possession charge snowballed into something way more sinister, double ember. But here's where it gets messy. Despite all the headlines and theories, there's no solid evidence linking Melly directly to the king. Sure, the prosecutors have been scrambling, throwing everything they've got at him, but it's starting to look like they're running out of cards to play.
However, the jail does not utilize solitary confinement. Mr. Demons has been placed on administrative segregation, an alternate living assignment for someone who poses a serious threat.
It seems like the legal team is grasping at straws, yet none of it has stuck, and with a retrial looming, many are wondering if this will just end up as another stalemate like the first trial.
The detective asked his colleague to lie because he illegally took Melly's mom's phone and blah, 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 blah. The assistant state attorney shows up to trial and says,
yes, we've all heard Emder on my mind. And let's be real, it feels like a full-on confession wrapped in a catchy beat. But how much weight does a song hold in court? Sure, there's footage placing Melly in the same car as Sakchaser and YNW. All went down, but no video shows him pulling the trigger. And no Emder weapon has ever been found. So while the chatter is that Melly might have been locked up for far too long as an innocent man, the real question is, can the prosecutors pull off a Hail Mary before the retrial? Let's get into it. So here's how it all spiraled. Melly was just 16, a regular kid with a whole lot of attitude and a serious grudge against few people, including his classmates. Instead of letting things slide, he let his anger get the best of him. And well, he pulled a move that lit up the police radar. They hauled him in. But since he was still a minor, he got a slap on the wrist, just a year behind bars. But here's the thing about catching the police's eye once you're on their radar. It's like having a permanent shadow you can't shake off. So when Melly walked out on probation, it wasn't exactly freedom. It was like walking on a tightrope with a judge, holding the safety net. Any slip, even a tiny one, and bam, he was back inside. And wouldn't you know it, that's exactly what happened this time. Though it wasn't for some wild stunt. It was his music that got him in trouble. The court decided his lyrics had a tone. They didn't imagine that your words, your art, being the reason you land back in jail. But here's where the plot thickens. Melly wasn't just any rapper spitting rhymes in his room. The guy was good, like blowing up the charts, kind of good. His tracks were catching fire. And while fans vibed to the beats, the judge tuned into the lyrics, and let's just say they weren't impressed. Their verdict, Melly's songs hinted at illegal stuff, so off to jail he went again. By this time, Melly's name was everywhere, and his buzz was undeniable. Fans were fired up, sparking a whole online movement. #free Melly was trending like crazy. People argued that jailing him over his music was downright unfair, and the pressure worked for a while. Melly walked out of jail again, but life on that police list is like quicksand. It just keeps pulling you back, and sure enough, he got picked up again over something minor, which only cemented what everyone already suspected. Once the system's got its hooks in you, it's almost impossible to escape. But this time, Melly wasn't just some kid from the block. He had a team, label, and a whole industry rooting for him. his label wasn't about to let their rising star sit in a cell they had records to sell and money to make. Melly got out yet again, and it seemed like maybe, just maybe, things were fine, finally turning around. Cue the drama though, because just as Melly started getting his groove back, boom, he gets arrested again. This time it's serious, and it couldn't have come at a crazier moment. Melly had just dropped Mixed Personalities featuring Kanye West. Let that sink in for a second. It's Kanye, and not just any Kanye. We're talking peak 2019 Kanye, when everything he touched was gold. The collab was massive, shooting Melly's fame into the stratosphere. Suddenly, everyone was digging into his catalog, hyping up his talent, and wondering how this kid from Florida could be so good. But as always, the cops were watching, almost like they were waiting for him to slip. And this time, oh, Melly messed up big time, a colossal mistake, one that would change everything. But before we dive into that, let's rewind a bit and unpack how Melly, this kid with so much potential, ended up in the middle of something way bigger than he could have ever imagined. Buckle up, it's about to get wild. So while YNW Melly star is on the rise, he's not riding solo. He's got his crew, the YNW family, right there with him. These aren't just some random guys either. There is Day, once his best friends from way back in school. We're talking YNW Sakchaser, YNW Juvy, and YNW Borton. Together, they're grinding, making music, and chasing the dream. Everything's looking up for them. But then out of nowhere, it all goes south in the worst way imaginable. One day, band bursts into a hospital, freaking out and claiming there's been a tragedy. He tells the staff that Saker and Juvy got shot and are in really bad shape. But here's where things get weird. Melly isn't with him when he rushes, and now everyone knows these guys roll as a pack. So the first question is, where's Melly? The police show up, recognizing the YNW name instantly. These guys are already on their radar. Something doesn't sit right though. They press Portland, who's visibly shaken. But all he says is he doesn't know where Melly is. That raises eyebrows. Still, they let him talk. Portland says the crew was just cruising around when out of nowhere some random shooters fired at them. According to him, Sakchaser and Juvy were hit because they were on the right side of the car, while he and Melly on the left side escaped unharmed. At this point, the police aren't buying it. The whole story feels off, and they're starting to dig deeper. First, they question Sakchaser and Juvy's roommate, who immediately tries to cover for Melly, claiming he doesn't know much. The cops push harder. And finally, the roommate cracks, admitting he'd seen Melly earlier, but couldn't say where he went with that. The police are on high alert. They're piecing together what they can, and it doesn't take long before they uncover surveillance footage. The video shows all four of them, Melly, Borton, Sakchaser, and Juvy, getting into the same car, exactly like Borland said. Sakchaser and Juvy were on the right, Melly, Borton on the left. So far, things line up. But the cops aren't letting their suspicions slide. As the roommate's story keeps changing and gaps in the timeline pile up, the police start thinking something bigger is going on. They don't have enough to go after Melly yet. His legal team isn't about to let him go down without a fight. But they know they need to dig deeper. That's when they decide to trace Melly's phone. They want to know exactly where he was and what he was doing when this all went down. And this is where things get real interesting. Portland said they were driving around, got ambushed, and then headed straight to the hospital. But the phone records, they paint a whole different picture. So get this, after the shooting, the car didn't head straight to the hospital like you'd think. Instead, it took this weird detour to a secluded area, not like a deep, spooky forest or anything, but definitely somewhere isolated and off the beaten path. Melly's phone data, it shows his phone sticking with the crew on this little side trip, then heading back out toward the hospital. But here's the wild part. During this whole ride, the car makes a stop to drop Melly off before Borland finally gets the victims to the hospital. By this point, the police are piecing things together. And let's just say it's not exactly painting Melly in the best light, with a phone tracking the conflicting stories and the detour. It's starting to look less like some random drive-by and more like something planned. Could Melly actually be involved? Honestly, the way things are shaping up, it's getting harder to argue otherwise. Now, here's the deal with investigations. Having evidence is one thing, but it's not enough to slam dunk a case. You need solid proof to back it up. So the cops head back to where Borland said the so-called drive-by happened. They show up, ask around, and guess what? Crickets. Nobody heard gunshots. Nothing suspicious, right? But they don't just leave it at that. They bring in a canine unit thinking, let's see if there's anything legit here, and surprise, surprise, the dog doesn't pick up on any shell casings or signs of a shooting at the supposed scene. But when they take that same dog to the secluded spot from the phone data, jackpot, the dog's all over it, and sure enough, shell casings turn up, and here's the kicker. Those casings match the bullets that offed Melly's friends. But wait it gets, even Messier investigators didn't stop there. They went full CSI, analyzing ballistics and tracing the bullets. Turns out the shots weren't fired at the car from outside like in a classic drive-by. Nope. The bullets came from inside the car, and the fatal shots both were fired from the left side of the vehicle. Now, remember, Melly and Borland were sitting on the left while Caesar and Juvy were on the right. So yeah, if this wasn't a drive-by, then what the heck was it? At this point, things are looking really bad for Melly. But here's the big question. Everyone's asking why would he ever do this? You can't just pin something this huge on someone without a motive. It's like trying to finish a puzzle without all the pieces. And here's where it gets weird. People who knew Melly said he was super close to Sakchaser and Juvy. These weren't just casual friends. They went way back, like all the way to kinder. Garden. Melly even had their names tattooed on his face while they were still alive.
Remember when I told you they were his best friends? Well, he was so close to them that he had their names tattooed on his face while they were alive. They've known each other since.
So what could have possibly gone so wrong? At first, the cops tried to point fingers at his song lyrics as if some rap bars could explain everything. But come on, that's not going to hold up in court. They needed a real solid reason, something that could actually explain why Melly would allegedly turn on the people he'd been tight with his whole life. So they bring Melly in for questioning, thinking they might get him to slip up. And here's the crazy little detail. When they said his name wrong, Melly didn't even flinch. Instead, he corrected them calm as ever. But the way he did it, it sent chills down the spines of everyone following this case. Pronounced demons. Wow, the interrogation came though, and the cops weren't holding back. They hit Melly with "Why'd you do it?" and he fired back. Cool as ever with "Do what?" Same story with Borton. He stuck to the script, leaving investigators ready to tear their hair out. They got nothing, but giving up wasn't on the table with no confession. The police bought time by hitting Melly with an unrelated minor charge to keep him locked up while they pieced together their case. A month later, they dropped the bomb double-emer charges for a sakchaser and Juvy.
YNW Melly, as well as another man, are being held here at the Broward County Jail this morning. They are each charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, and they're also accused of, as you said, staging this crime.
Classic move, sure, but risky. If the cops overstep while gathering evidence, it could all fall apart, leading to a mistrial and Melly walking free. And honestly, the courts weren't impressed. They poked at the case. What's the motive? Why would Melly off his best friends? The investigators came up empty. Then came the next blow. What about the weapon? Any proof it's tied to Melly again? Nothing. It was looking bleak. No motive, no weapon, no solid tie to Melly. Just circumstantial evidence like phone tracking and ballistic.
Miramar Police Department. The first image illustrates how authorities believe all 4 men were seated in the vehicle when the crime took place. Other photos mark bullet trajectory in the vehicle with blood clearly visible all over the car. Prove the drive-by was staged. Several shots actually came from inside the vehicle. The prosecutor also used cell phone tracking data to prove Melly was at the scene of the crime.
But without the critical pieces, their case still looked shaky. And the million-dollar question lingered. Is it enough? Or does Melly walk? They threw him into solitary confinement, hoping the isolation and pressure would be enough to make him crack, to get him to confess, or at least slip up. But here's the twist, they underestimated him. Because what happened next? It's the kind of plot twist that leaves everyone's jaws on the floor. after his stint in solitary things took a wild turn. The cops claimed Melly was plotting some grand escape, which honestly felt like a stretch. His legal team was done with the nonsense and decided to fight back. They encouraged Melly to sue the police department for the way he'd been treated, and they weren't holding back. They started applying serious pressure, saying enough is enough. Either the prosecutors charge him properly, or they let him walk. The ball was firmly in their court. Finally, a judge stepped in and called for a retrial, but for the prosecutors, it was like showing up to school with no homework done. They brought out all the evidence, ballistics, phone tracking, you name it. But when it came time to tie it all together, the case fell apart faster than they could say reasonable doubt. Even though the jury started leaning toward thinking Melly might have done it, they weren't fully convinced. The big questions were still hanging in the air. Why would he do this? And what did he even use to do it? The prosecutors' answers weak. The best they could come up with was that Melly was a bad guy based on his rap lyrics. Seriously, that was it. But Melly's lawyer wasn't about to let them get away with that. He went straight for the jury, asking the one question that mattered. Do you have any reasonable doubt that Melly did what they're accusing him of? And here's the thing they did in the court system. Reasonable doubt is the ultimate trump card. If it's there, you can't convict. End of story. On top of that, the way the police handled the case had been shady from the jump. At one point, the lead detective was caught red-handed asking colleague to lie for him right in front of the assistant state attorney. And this wasn't over something minor either. It was about the detective illegally taking Melly's mom's phone, which just made the whole case even messier. The lead detective asked his colleague to lie because he illegally took Melly's mom's phone and blah, 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 blah. The assistant state attorney shows up to trial and says he lied. And to top it all off, the assistant state attorney had enough. She straight up quit, saying she couldn't work with liars. It was like the prosecution's case was crumbling in real time, and there was no saving it. That kind of scandal was enough to make the jury side-eye everything else the police brought to the table. If they were willing to lie about one thing, how much of the rest could they even trust? It didn't help that the prosecutors seemed desperate to pin something on Melly. No matter what, after hours of deliberation, the jury was stuck. 8 thought Melly did it, but 4 weren't convinced. Deadlock. The judge had no choice but to declare Mistrial. Melly's team was hyped. They dodged a bullet. But the prosecutors, they weren't giving up that easily. They called for a retrial almost immediately, still clinging to flimsy arguments like his rap lyrics and clips from a documentary. The judge practically rolled their eyes, saying, "Come on, this is a stretch." The prosecutors doubled down, pointing out, "But he was in the car, that's got to mean something." The judge shut it down. But the appeals started flying, first from the prosecutors, then from Melly's team. It was a circus. And while all this legal back and forth dragged on, guess where Melly was still stuck behind bars? His lawyers were over it, saying it's been 5 years. Either charge him properly or let him go. But the courts moved at a snail's pace, taking 6 more months, just to decide they'd go for another trial, and then setting it for the following year. At this point, the whole thing feels like a bad joke, whether you believe Melly did it or not. The justice system is supposed to treat everyone as innocent until proven guilty, yet here's Melly still in jail under harsh conditions for 5 long years without a verdict. And the prosecutors, they've had all the time in the world to build their case. But they're still coming up short. It feels like they know they're going to lose, but are dragging this out just to make him suffer in the meantime. If there's one big takeaway, it's this: the courts hate losing. They'll stall, bend the rules, and throw every trick in the book to save face, even if it means keeping someone locked up without solid evidence. But here's the truth, unless proven: guilty Melly is innocent, and he deserves to be treated like it.